say just a little bit about myself so you know who is speaking to you. Some of you know me, many of you may not. My name is David Akbar Gillum, and small correction, I was a professor and chair of modern languages department at University, DePaul University, which is the largest Catholic university. Great place for a Muslim, right? Largest Catholic university in the United States. And actually, there's a very active Muslim student body as well as staff and faculty on the campus in Lincoln Park in Chicago. But I think it's also important that you know about me that I grew up in part in Chicago. My hometown is Youngstown, Ohio, which is halfway between Cleveland and Pittsburgh and halfway between Chicago and New York. But I grew up in Englewood in the late 1950s and started grade school there, lived there on the South Side, and then moved back to my home state of Ohio after 5 or 6 years living there. So I returned to Chicago in the 1970s, shortly after I was married. I wanted to start with just a little short comment on to try to give perspective to ourselves and to what I would like to say more personally on my viewing of the talk, the lecture given yesterday by Brother Imam Omar Haqqani, because I think it gave us an excellent perspective. I think it's important that we as Muslims always start with our deen, our faith, and our tradition and knowledge of Islam to look at any challenge, any problem, or any opportunity. And so I think Brother Imam Haqqani gave us a good start on that, even in a short lecture. So I just wanted to make a couple of observations. And I apologize, I did not start at the very beginning. I wasn't able to see it from the very beginning, but I think I caught most of it. So the first thing that I noted was that he gave us advice on what we should do about these events. What should we do about these events surrounding us now, following the death, the killing, the murder of George Floyd? He said, listen to the issues. He said, as Muslims, lead by example. And he said, lend support in doing what your talents allow you to do, and to not get bogged down in criticizing others who may have different approaches, different talents than what we personally have, but do what you can do based on your own talents. He also mentioned a hadith from our Prophet, peace be upon him, by Abu Sayyid Khudri. And in that hadith, he talked about a stance toward justice and injustice and how we should respond. And that is, change it with your hand, if you can do that. If not, change it with your tongue, if you can do that. Speak out. And if not, do it in your heart. In other words, condemn injustice, even in your heart. And maybe this will prepare you to take further action with the tongue or the hand later. And he ended by mentioning that we as Muslims should be on the right side of history. So we can't, sitting back and doing nothing is not an option for us as Muslims, as exemplified in this hadith, and that we should be on the right side of history. At this point, as he's closing, I want to take a special opportunity as I'm addressing so many Toastmasters. I thought Brother Imam Haqqani used such an exciting and effective tool in his approach to his audience, which he knew was primarily Muslims, but which he also had in the back of his mind could be anyone in the city area of Chicago, anyone in the nation, and anyone in the world, really. He quoted a 1962 statement by President John F. Kennedy. He said, "Those who make peaceful revolution impossible make violent revolution inevitable." Those who make peaceful revolution impossible make violent revolution inevitable. Now, the reason why, especially as a Toastmaster, and so many of you, this was so effective is he drew on a source that many more than just the Muslims can identify with. A president of the United States. Taken from another source, this could be considered incendiary. This could be considered just not given a lot of weight. But when attributed to a US president, it causes a lot more weight behind the statement and a great surprise. So I wanted to start with that. He ended with, we must address this problem from the roots, the root causes. So I think all of that, just my observation on what he said, really sets the tone for what many of us are feeling. Because the things I would like to add, and I will summarize first for you to be able to follow me. I want to speak about primarily 4 different points. Number 1, history. 2, dialogue. 3, focus. And 4, organize. So history, cultivate a sense of history. And we got a very important view on this from our previous speaker and even the one before him. Brother Asad Koshal and Troy Jackson, who are on my right and left on your screen. Alhamdulillah, I'm glad to be in illustrious company, sharing my thoughts with you. Develop a dedication to dialogue. Focus, stay focused and don't get distracted. And number 4, organize. All right, I'm actually going to start a little bit with number 3, the focus, because I think this is one thing that we really need to have in order to take full advantage. Many of us see this as a great problem, which it is. But the death of George Floyd represents, just like the characters in the Chinese language that have an ideogram that says crisis, which also means opportunity. We face these 2 things. But if we get distracted, it won't be an opportunity. We are in the midst of a worldwide phenomenon. People can easily get distracted by the negatives that have come up afterward. That is the looting and the rioting, or so on and so called. But the fact is, we are in a moment when we have faced not only this situation with the death of George Floyd that has caused people around the world to rise up. People from New Zealand to Denmark, unexpected places, are rising up in the streets, just as people in Chicago, Minneapolis, Detroit, and maybe 100 other cities, not to mention Naperville and Wheaton, other places where people are having protests in our area. So we have to ask ourselves why. We're also in the midst of a pandemic, like nothing has been seen for 100 years. And these 2 forces, these 2 events come together to highlight inequality and injustice. And they present an opportunity for us to act, to take personal responsibility, to educate ourselves personally, and to band together with each other to act. And that's what we're seeing in every city, is people deciding this doesn't just concern the African American community. It doesn't just concern any ethnic or religious group of people. It affects and touches and moves people all over the world. And there's a reason for that. If we get bogged down on these other things, we'll miss the opportunity to redress and correct these things in a way that we've never had before. Although we've been building on the backs and other events, the list of names, beginning with Trayvon Martin up until George Floyd, the list of people who have shed blood to make progress through the decades, through the centuries, and a sense of history. So what is the sense of history? One of the things Brother Omar Haqqani, Brother Imam, mentioned was what our prophet did, peace be upon him, to elevate Blacks within his circle, within the society of that time. And so that's important. It's also important to pair that with the fact that in the larger context, and this was part of the revolution, the so-called Black Power movement of the 1970s especially, people of African descent have had kingdoms, some of them Muslim, some of them non-Muslim, empires. Why is this important? Well, it's important to balance this, have a sense of history, that we are in a certain point of history today, maybe even for hundreds of years, that doesn't necessarily go back thousands of years. Even in the time of the Moors in Spain, there was a different image of people of African descent that included a respect and a knowledge of their power, wisdom, and administrative skills, their governing skills, empire building skills, and sometimes their sense of justice and building societies. And so this is part of the heritage of the 70s, and sometimes it's become almost a stereotype to the extent, is this reality? Well, it's important to know where you came from. This was part of the Nation of Islam. This was part of El-Hajj Malik al-Shabazz, better known to many of us as Malcolm X, is knowing your history. And it may include oppression, very definitely oppression that we need to confront. But the sense of personhood and humanity goes way beyond that. A sense of history is important because all around the world, people are showing a sense of history because of identifying with colonialism, anti-colonial efforts, and oppression in any form in their own society, as well as from America, and specifically directed against African Americans and Black people. Malcolm and Martin. Look up on YouTube, in our own time, two of the most important figures in justice in our own time are Martin Luther King and El-Hajj Malik al-Shabazz, Malcolm X. Look them up on YouTube. Look up the books they wrote or co-wrote. Look up the movies, like the one mentioned that Spike Lee made about these lives and how they interacted with society. This will give us, build our sense of history. The Abyssinian past, the African past. Another example, of course, from the of power in the time of our prophet was the Negus of Abyssinia giving shelter to the Muslims that the prophet gave authority to move to Ethiopia or Abyssinia. And the Negus, or the king, heard the two different sides in his court and ended up siding with the Muslims and offering them asylum, protecting them. Dialogue. develop a dedication to dialogue, learn the arguments of the opposition. As strong as this movement is worldwide, you know we have opposition to it, not just police abuse, police brutality, improper use of the police, not just to serve and protect. But we need to look at all the forms of inequity that this pandemic and that these events are bringing to light. Unequal access to health, unequal access to education and other economic resources. That's what this is bringing to light that we need to take action on. And when we develop a dedication to dialogue, we work with each other, we work with other groups of various faith traditions. And here again, we have an opportunity to work with other people and maybe even persuade other people. I had an example the other day. You know, we get so much information over the internet. And there was a young woman, young African-American woman speaking. And this was passed along by Rick Fisher, who was running for DuPage County Board. And she was speaking and really criticizing the fact that George Floyd was getting so much support when his life or responsibility or character didn't warrant it. To me, that is missing, again, back to the point of the forest for the trees. You letting the trees get in the way and not getting the fact that he is a symbol of worldwide inequity and oppression. This is his greatest achievement and value to us. Is what happened to him could happen to any of us. Any of you in the audience who look like me and are African American of whatever age and man or woman could easily have this. And we know from the list of names that it has happened to many, even recently, even in the midst of protest, it continues to happen. So that is what we must keep our eye on. This same Rick Fisher visited a mosque, the Islamic Center of the Western Suburbs, in the course of his campaign. I was very disappointed to see that he would pass on a message like this. But I remembered again, dedication to dialogue. The fact that he came to a mosque gives us a better access to Rick Fisher and talking out things. And so we want to build the ability to continue with dialogue. We've talked about focus. Stay focused, don't get distracted. We build these personal relationships. We may be able to persuade people. People are open as they never have been to learning about what's going on and how to correct inequity and injustice. And finally, a very short point, organize. Through our gathering together, we organize efforts. We're always stronger as a group than we are as individuals, although individuals certainly are important. Groups are made up of individuals. We have so many different sources of information about how to work. President Barack Obama put out a tweet just a few days ago, and in that tweet, he gave a list of links of organizations that are already working on this that we can use as starting points. And he reminded us, and so many others are reminding us, that one of the ultimate sources of our power as a society, as individuals in a society, to make us productive citizens is the vote. We have the power of the vote, and we should not discount it, even as individuals. People have died and shed blood, just as George Floyd did, to give us the right to vote. in this country and in other countries around the world. The privilege, the right to vote should not be taken lightly. And if we need to make changes, voting is one way to do it. Whether it's here in Wheaton or Carroll Stream or Glendale Heights or Naperville or DuPage County, Illinois, the United States, all over the world, voting is a way to do it. So I don't know if there's any time left. Obviously, all of us get very passionate when it comes to this topic, whether it's personally or whether it's due to our community. But I'm glad for the opportunity to share with you. This is a very important topic. We are in a historical time. We don't want to miss our opportunity to make progress against eliminating an injustice and a system of injustice and bringing to the chance to right the wrong. Many people are standing up everywhere. They want to be a part of righting the wrong, who never stood up, who never even perceived the wrong in how powerful and pervasive it is. They want to help. They want to do what they can. It's up to us